I can't believe I'm saying this, but November is over already. We're in the final month of the year, and among other things, that means that it's time for me to rank my entire watch list from the month of November. Let's do this. What's going on, my friends? Welcome again to the Cobwebs channel. My name is Daniel, and yes, today I'm going to be ranking all 15 movies / Blu-ray releases that I watched over the past month. Now, I just want to introduce the list with a few things. So, number one, I announced that November was going to be a murder mystery month for me, and I told you guys what my big to-watch list was going to be for the month, and it went pretty good, but not as well as I'd hoped, and that's honestly because I watched one box set of murder mysteries. If you've been watching the channel, you know what that is, because I did a whole video on it recently, and that just took a lot of time. 14 movies. Sometimes when I needed a break binging through that box set, I didn't want another murder mystery, so definitely some non-murder mysteries in here. Definitely some horror movies, because I still felt like I needed that horror fix, as well as some romantic comedies and Christmas movies that I ended up watching with my wife over the last month. So yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it with number 15 on the list, which is actually still a pretty good movie. I didn't really watch anything bad on this list, but at the bottom I did put 8-Bit Christmas from 2021. This is a straight to HBO Max movie that came out in 2021. You can stream it on HBO Max right now. And essentially the movie is a ripoff or homage, however you want to look at it, of A Christmas Story. The movie takes place in the 1980s, but you've got adult Neil Patrick Harris telling the story of his childhood back in the 80s about how the Christmas that he really wanted a Nintendo. And the Nintendo is essentially the 80s update for a Red Ryder BB gun. And the movie plays out in a very similar fashion to A Christmas Story. It's actually kind of surprising how closely it sticks to the formula. Not entirely, but pretty close. And the movie is pretty good. Now, as somebody who didn't grow up playing video games, which I know is weird for my generation, and a person who's not into video games now, sometimes it felt hard for me to relate just how obsessed he was with getting a Nintendo. Like, I don't know, that just wasn't my experience, but, and you do have to dock the movie a little bit for being so close to another movie. But by the end, the emotions kind of got me. Pretty much father-son stuff in any movie is going to hit me in the heart at least just a little bit, and this movie ended up doing a pretty good job with that. The kid's dad is played by Steve Zahn, and I wouldn't think Steve Zahn would be so perfect to play like such a Midwest, old-fashioned dad, but he nails it, and he ended up being one of my favorite things about the movie. At number 14 is a new movie from this year. My wife and I streamed this on Netflix. This is No Hard Feelings, starring Jennifer Lawrence. This is a movie with a very strange premise where a woman in her mid-30s is hired by a couple, including Matthew Broderick as the husband, who want her to pretend to date her son and like date their son, like all the way date their son. And essentially because he's so shy and awkward, and they're afraid that before he goes to college, if he never breaks out of his shell, he's just not going to have a good college life and then not a good life altogether. So they're trying to avoid that by getting him some experience with girls, even if they have to pay for it. It's an outlandish premise, but one that actually worked pretty well for a comedy. I thought this movie was pretty decent. I liked it. I especially liked it because Jennifer Lawrence, and I like the reason that she's in this movie, because this isn't the kind of movie she's been doing lately. So I've heard the story is that her management team just kept wanting to put her in Oscar bait kind of roles like she'd been doing for a long time. And she's just like, no, screw that. I don't want to do that stuff anymore. Like, I want to do a comedy. I want to do something fun. So she fired her management team, got a new one, and got into this raunchy comedy. And I respect that when the top talent in Hollywood wants to do something that is kind of a genre movie and something that's fun and not the same old weepy drama that's going to get Oscar buzz and nobody's going to remember in a little bit. Like, there's just way too much top talent in Hollywood that's doing that over and over again, when in reality, the people that are really remembered by movie fans tend to be the people that make genre movies, horror, action, comedy, stuff like that. And I do wish the top talent would do that more often, and I respect Jennifer Lawrence for doing it. But all in all, the movie is pretty funny, never laugh out loud hilarious. There's some good jokes in there, but it's not an incredibly funny comedy. It's kind of sweet by the end, which a lot of comedies these days are, that they're super raunchy, and then by the end they go for the heartstrings, and this one does. and does a decent job at it. I will say when the movie ended, I was kind of surprised. Not like I wanted the movie to keep going because I loved it so much, but because it felt a little anticlimactic to me. I felt a little bit like, oh, that's it. Okay, we're done. All right, we're done. At number 13, this is a movie that Vinegar Syndrome just recently put out. I don't own it, but I did stream it on Shudder or AMC Plus, something like that. This is The Boogeyman from 1980. So this movie opens up with a couple of kids being raised by their mom, who's not a good mother at all, and her boyfriend, and there's some abuse going on. It's a very bad family situation. And the young son ends up murdering the stepdad. We then cut to years later. We pick up with those kids, now adults. They're living with their grandparents. And the son now he never talks. He's like completely withdrawn into himself. He just helps out on the farm. And the daughter now has a husband and has a kid, but they're still all living together on this farm. And what happens is they end up getting a mirror that came from their childhood home. And it turns out the mirror is possessed with the ghost of this abusive man who the son killed. So the movie is basically Halloween meets Amityville Horror. What do I mean by that? Amityville Horror in the way that it's about a haunted object, as a lot of Amityville films were. It's definitely a haunting movie. A ghost is the main villain, and it feels very influenced by that. That movie, Amityville Horror, came out just the year before. But what came out 2 years before was Halloween. And in a lot of stylistic choices, this is so clearly heavily influenced by Halloween. While it is a paranormal ghost movie, they really try to make it a slasher film as much as they possibly can. And there's just a lot of things you'll see like, oh, that's out of Halloween, that's out of Halloween. All in all, I really enjoyed this movie. I thought it was a good time. I like the farmland atmosphere that most of the movie takes place in. It keeps things entertaining. It's got some good kills in there, some really good kills, including one involving a kiss in a car. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. Apparently, at least the slipcovered edition of this sold out at the last Vinegar Syndrome sale. So if you don't want to buy it without a slipcover or something, you can stream it on Shudder like I did. All right, it's finally time for some physical media with a DVD. Gosford Park. I believe this is the first DVD that's ever made it into my end of the month rankings. So yeah, I picked up the DVD for Gosford Park for a few bucks because I wasn't sure if I wanted to buy the Blu-ray because the Blu-ray is pretty expensive. And I'm glad I got the DVD because here's the thing. This movie is good. It's a murder mystery, by the way, and it's directed by Robert Altman. Pretty big name right there. And it is about a countryside estate in England, and a whole bunch of people are gathering at this estate for this big weekend. And the movie is pretty evenly split between the rich people gathering at the estate and the servants who are serving them. Pretty evenly split between the two groups, which was pretty interesting because a lot of times in a story like this, the servants will just be background characters and will focus on the rich people. And this movie, it splits the focus, which I thought was pretty cool. And the movie is good. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars when it ended. I was like, that's a really good movie. Here's the thing. This movie has not stuck with me like at all. Like, I'm even like struggling to remember. I don't know, something about this movie, it just floats out of my brain. Something about it. I don't know. It has an amazing cast. I mean, it's got Helen Mirren and Clive Owen. Why are those the only 2 names I can remember off the top of my head? But it does have a pretty phenomenal cast. When it gets to the end of the murder mystery, it's pretty interesting because it becomes clear this isn't really about like finding the killer. This is more so about why the killer did it and what were they justified. It ends up being a little bit of an interesting commentary. I thought it's a good movie. It's definitely good. I don't think I'd ever watch it again though. It just kind of floated out of my brain, and I liked other stuff. I liked all the other murder mysteries I watched this month better. Next up, kind of a split between a murder mystery and a vampire movie. This is The Night Stalker from 1972. This is a TV movie. Speaking of A Christmas Story, starring Darren McGavin, who's the dad in A Christmas Story, as a reporter named Kolchak. And there are a bunch of murders happening in the city. And he's investigating these murders as a journalist, and he begins to believe that the killer is a vampire. And the movie is interesting because it is a vampire. Like, come on. I mean, you look on the back right there, that dude is a vampire. And that's what the movie is about. But the vampire is a pretty traditional vampire. They're not really updating him, like a pretty traditional Gothic horror vampire. But the movie really asked, like, what would that be like in the real world? Like, how would people really react to him? And it handled that in a pretty interesting way, I thought. And the movie was just fun. Like, it's just a good time. I really enjoy 70s TV horror movies. Like, I think 70s, I was like the prime decade for television horror movies. And this is just a cozy little vampire watch. I really enjoyed it. At number 10, my favorite Christmas movie that I watched in November. My wife and I checked this out on Amazon Prime. Apparently it came to Prime Video in 2022. This movie is called Something from Tiffany's. Pretty interesting premise. It stars Zoe Deutch. I'm not totally sure how to pronounce her name. She's a little bit of like a B-tier star who goes in a lot of streaming rom-coms and stuff like that. And the movie kind of opens with her boyfriend going to Tiffany's to buy a present for her. He doesn't really care what he gets, just something reasonable, he says. He ends up getting her some earrings. And there's another guy there, played by Kendrick Sampson, who's there to buy an engagement ring for his girlfriend. He wants to propose. The two guys end up like clashing because a car hits one of them. And in the scuffle, they switch bags accidentally and then present the presents to their girlfriends Christmas morning. And the wrong girl gets an engagement ring and the right girl doesn't. It's a rom-com, so it's a big misunderstanding. But as you watch the movie, you kind of question, like, is this person with the right person? Should these people get married? Should these two instead? You know, you kind of can see where this movie is going. But I really enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty solid. Like, I've seen a lot of these streaming, like, Christmas rom-coms and these Hallmark movies. I don't really like most of them. But this was a good one. This was a cut above, clearly of a higher quality than a lot of those. It also has a lot of just really classic Christmas music in there, like from Dean Martin and Julie London, just the kind of classic Christmas I really like to hear. Good snowy New York atmosphere in this. I just thought it was a good watch, romantic where it needed to be. I enjoyed it. And that is actually the last of the streaming titles. Now to move on to just physical media. We've got the Vinegar Syndrome Blu-ray for Count Dracula's Great Love. I kind of feel like every video this month, I'm holding this movie up for some reason. We got a couple of Dracula movies in here because I did a top 15 Dracula movies video over the past month. That was super fun. I really enjoyed that. And this is a Paul Naschy movie in which Paul Naschy plays Dracula. It has a pretty typical gothic horror premise for a while where the carriage breaks down for a carriage with this one dude and 4 beautiful women. They have to go up to the castle out in the countryside because it's the only place they can stay. And there's a mysterious guy there. Maybe he's Count Dracula. Yeah, it's Paul Naschy. I enjoyed this movie. I thought it was really fun. Just out of this world, great gothic vampire atmosphere. Let's see. One thing that I'm trying to think of something I haven't said about this movie already because I've talked about it a few times on the channel. And I will say the opening credits are kind of amazing because the movie opens up with this scene and the scene ends with a guy getting an axe to the head. I think it's an axe. And he falls down the stairs in slow motion. And that shot of him falling down the stairs in slow motion plays on repeat through the entire opening credits, which are probably like 2 or 3 minutes. It's honestly pretty funny. My number 8 was part of my murder mystery watches and one that I really enjoy. This is the last movie that I watched in the month, actually. And that is An Inspector Calls, starring Alistair Sim. It's from 1954. Which kind of surprised me. Honestly, I thought this was a 40s movie watching it. That's what it seemed like to me. But that aside, apparently it's based on a play, and it is about this wealthy family who's having dinner. They're celebrating the recent engagement of the daughter, and an inspector shows up, played by Alistair Sim, kind of a weird, maybe a little bit creepy guy. But he comes in and he says that a girl has just died. She drank poison and she's now in the morgue. And because of this, he has to ask the family a few questions. And they don't really understand why. But as he's asking his questions, it becomes clear that every member of the family has had contact with this girl and they've all done her wrong in some way. It's very unrealistic that they would all have these very dramatic encounters with this one girl that they don't really know. But it becomes clear as the movie goes that this is really more of a fable or a parable about class. It's a scathing class commentary that is 100% as relevant today as it ever was. I mean, I recognize lines of dialogue that like I hear in life today. Like, I just completely recognize so many of the situations that happen in this. Like, it's really, really timeless in the point it's trying to make. It's almost like A Christmas Story in like being a Christmas Story? No, I just talked about that. A Christmas Carol, Scrooge, which is funny because Alistair Sim played Scrooge. But in being like this parable about how wealthy people need to treat those of lower classes better and not just step all over them whenever it's convenient. But this is a much less uplifting story, much darker and a little bit more twisted. And very adult too, for sure. Like, especially for a movie from the 50s. I really loved it. I thought it was fantastic. It's only 80 minutes. It really gets in and gets out. And Alistair Sim is fantastic in it. At number 7 is the next Paul Naschy movie on the list. The last movie from this Paul Naschy Collection Volume 1 from Scream Factory. The last movie I hadn't seen yet. I checked out this month. And that is Blue Eyes of the Broken Doll. But I'm just going to put that down and put a poster up because that's a better visual aid. Blue Eyes of the Broken Doll is a giallo. It's, again, a very typical Paul Naschy plot where Paul Naschy is a drifter. He stumbles onto a house that's full of beautiful women, 3 sisters who live there together. And he gets hired to basically be a caretaker and a handyman around the house. And he ends up working that job. He sleeps with a couple of the women there, as Paul Naschy always does. But there also end up being a series of murders happening in the house or in the community around the house. And it's very much a giallo, but it's a very unconventional giallo in several ways too. It's got some pretty great kill scenes, probably the best one involving like a little gardening hand rake. Pretty great kill scenes for sure. Yeah, it's just a weird, unpredictable giallo, pretty good reveal to the end murder mystery. And also Paul Naschy, his end in this movie is unusual for one of his movies. And it's kind of like this big action shootout. Kind of reminded me of High Sierra with Humphrey Bogart, actually. I really recommend this. I thought this was a really, really good Paul Naschy movie. Very much a traditional giallo, but deviates from the formulas in a lot of cool ways, even so. At number 6, just before the top 5, we have got Death Trap. I picked this up on Warner Archive Blu-ray specifically because I knew I wanted to watch it for Murder Mystery Month. Heard great things about it so much. This movie's from the 1980s and it stars Michael Caine as a playwright who had an amazing success with a murder mystery thriller on Broadway early in his career, but since then has been dealing with flop after flop after flop. And the movie opens up with another one of his plays opening. It flops and he goes back home to his wife. He's just complaining about how awful his career is going. He's so upset. But he talks about a script that one of his old students, because he also teaches playwriting, that one of his old students sent him, and it's so good. And he invites that student over, played by Christopher Reeve. And the wife begins to worry that Michael Caine might have murder on the mind in order to get this script. It's so much fun because this movie has twist upon twist upon twist. Like, it has so many wild, crazy twists to it. Like, I would compare it a little bit to the Rian Johnson recent murder mysteries, Knives Out and Glass Onion, in that those are murder mysteries, but they have pretty dramatic deviations from the formula to make them very different than the traditional murder mystery. That's kind of how this movie is too. The 3 main performances from Michael Caine, Christopher Reeve, and Diane Cannon, who's the wife, are so phenomenal, but the standout performance, I gotta say, Christopher Reeve. He is electric in this movie and just doing a wide variety of things, and he's so, so good. I really enjoyed this. I just thought it was a blast. It's just super fun and twisty and crazy and a great time. Cracking into the top 5 is the Sherlock Holmes collection from Basil Rathbone. This is all 14 films starring Basil Rathbone as Sherlock Holmes. I didn't want to rank each individual one alone all over again. I already did a video doing that. So if you want to see me do a deep dive into this set, check out that video. Yeah, I really enjoyed this set. I gotta say though, I kind of wish I didn't binge it so fast because I wish I savored it a little bit, because there were times where like this wasn't exactly what I was in the mood for. I kind of want to watch something else, but had to keep watching through this so I could get that video out in November like I promised I would. Committing to a video where you have to watch 14 movies in 1 month, it's kind of a big commitment. So I feel like I learned a lesson a little bit, but I do really like this set. I think there's a lot of movies that in here that are really, really good. My favorite, well, I'm not going to tell you my favorite. You got to watch the ranking video. But this did end up meaning I watched less murder mysteries than I intended to, because this thing just took so long and it made me sometimes need a break from murder mysteries, but great stuff. Still putting it at number 5. So November, in addition to being my murder mystery month, was also Criterion sale month. And I watched 3 Criterions in the month of November. The first one is coming in at number 4. That is Eve's Bayou. I wasn't even intending to buy this in the sale this year, but I just heard some really great things about it. I was at Barnes & Noble, and I just picked it up because I heard that it is kind of a witch movie. And it is. It's from 1997, directed by Cassie Lemons. It's about an affluent Black family living in New Orleans in the 1960s. It's a period piece, and Samuel Jackson is the patriarch of the family. And, you know, he's the doctor. He's got a beautiful wife, great house, great kids. He's really just got life made. But we find out that he can't help but just run around with other women. He is not faithful, and it's really taking a toll on everyone in his family in a variety of ways. And the movie opens up with a line that it says on the back of the Blu-ray: "The summer I killed my father, I was 10 years old." So it's told from the perspective of the 10-year-old daughter, and apparently it's all leading up to that moment. It's got witchcraft in there. They call it voodoo in this, but it's very, very witchy in a great way that I really, really enjoyed. Such great performances, such great Southern Gothic atmosphere. And it's just so rare to get to see a period piece about a Black community back in the 60s. And it doesn't deal with racism because there's no white people in this movie. It's just about the Black community. And I thought that was great because it really gave the characters room to breathe, room to have a different story than Black characters are often saddled with in period piece movies in Hollywood movies. And this movie is from a Black filmmaker, so you can really feel that voice in there, that it's not, I don't know, some white person trying to make themselves seem smart. I don't know. It's clearly from a great perspective, and it's a really, really good movie. At number 3, we have got Blood for Dracula. This is the other Dracula movie I checked out for the first time over the last month for my Dracula video. Severin Blu-ray for this movie starring Udo Kier as Dracula. This is such a bizarre movie, and this is the first horror movie I've seen in a long time that really shocked me and like made my jaw drop from just how sick and twisted and demented it is. This movie is not for everybody, okay? I would say if you're the kind of person that needs like almost any content advisory warnings, like, oh, I don't want to see this kind of thing in movies, don't watch this, because this, you could put like every warning with this movie. Like, it is really sick, twisted, demented. I can't say those words enough, but it's a Dracula movie, or Udo Kier. He's Dracula. He hasn't had virgin blood in a long time. Not all vampire stories really put a lot of emphasis on virgin blood, but this one does. And he's trying to get virgin blood so he won't be so sickly anymore. Just the way he feeds and blood gushes out of his mouth. It's so disgusting. And the ending is insane. I loved it. I loved this movie, but this is the kind of thing I would enjoy, but not for everybody. At number 2, we have got another Criterion Blu-ray for Anatomy of a Murder. I actually picked this up in the Criterion sale in July, finally checked it out. This movie is amazing, but it's 2 hours and 40 minutes long. It's pretty rare that I have the time to watch, like I have the same block of time to watch something that long these days. So I put it on one night with absolutely no intention to finish it that night. I just decided to watch it over 2 days, but I couldn't turn it off. This movie is like impossible to turn off. I stayed up late. I watched it all in one night. So this movie is based on a book that was also based on a real trial. And it's about Jimmy Stewart, and a couple comes to him with a case. He's a defense lawyer. And the case is that the husband shot a man. And that is absolute fact. He admits it. So who did the murder is not a mystery. But the movie's all about why did he do it? Now, he claims he did it because this man brutally assaulted his wife, who's played by Lee Remick, by the way. So it seems like he's justified in that. But what I really liked about this movie is it's very realistic about how being a lawyer works, how a trial works, how a defense attorney works. I talked to a friend of mine a while back who is a lawyer, and I love lawyer stories, hearing lawyer stories from lawyers. I have no interest in being a lawyer, but I'm fascinated by the profession. I love to hear about it. And one thing that he told me is when you are a defense lawyer, you don't even want to know if your client is guilty or not. That is not the point. It's completely beside the issue. Like, when you're a defense lawyer, your job is getting your client off. Whether they did it or not, whether they did it, you don't even care. You don't even ask. He says when you're a defense lawyer, you don't even ask them. You don't want to know. And this movie really takes that perspective where, like, as an audience, you know he did it. And you go back and forth on like whether you believe him about him and his wife, about his story. You start to think that he's not a good guy, and you're not sure, like, is Jimmy Stewart doing the right thing trying to get this guy off? Like, maybe he should go to jail. And the movie really bounces you back and forth. But that's not the point for Jimmy Stewart. He's constantly coming up with all these tactics to win, and in ways that seem like cheating by Hollywood standards. But this is what you do if you're a defense lawyer. This is all about the defense making the client seem as excusable as possible, making the reasons for the murder as understandable as possible, and the prosecutors trying to make the reasons as doubtful as possible and try to make the guy look as bad as possible. So that's really what it is. It's this event happened, but what perspective are we going to put on it? Which perspective is the jury going to end up taking? I probably talked for way too long about that, but I thought it was fascinating. This is a fascinating movie. The Criterion Blu-ray looks fantastic. It's full of jazz music because Jimmy Stewart's character is a big jazz fan. He's always playing the piano. Man, the dialogue is just so awesome. And it's got a booklet in here that's really, really interesting that I really do recommend reading. So I loved Anatomy for a Murder. It was the best murder mystery that I watched in November. But for my number one, it's a movie I picked up in the Criterion sale. I'd seen it before, but not in a long time. And I remembered liking it, not loving it, but this time I loved it. And that is The Others, a ghost story from 2001 starring Nicole Kidman. It is about Nicole Kidman and her two children who live in a remote English countryside manor. And the servants who come in to take the job as their servants. And you've probably seen this movie before, but the kids have a disease where they're super sensitive to light. So Nicole Kidman is constantly having to keep the house dark, taking out these keys because she keeps doors locked at all times. It makes the house feel like a prison, and she's a warden because they're locking out the light. And it just keeps this dark, spooky atmosphere through the movie like all the time. It's such a good idea for a ghost story house. Now, it's very, very creepy. There's a scene in particular involving an old lady / a little girl. If you've seen the movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That I'd forgotten about. That's so creepy. The atmosphere is just out of this world. Great for spooky, gothic, old, dark house atmosphere. Stellar beyond words. And I remembered the twist, but I didn't remember everything about it. And still, things about it were shocking that the movie was willing to go there. And I do think the twist is really, really cool. So I absolutely love The Others now. I'm so happy to have it on a Criterion Blu-ray. And this is a great addition. I did get the Blu-ray instead of the 4K. I found out the 4K doesn't have HDR anyway. And I'll tell you right now, this Blu-ray looks gorgeous. Like, I thought the transfer was out of this world, stellar. I almost can't imagine the 4K looking better, but maybe it does. But that's my number one for the month of November. So other than the stuff that I streamed that I talked to you about, this is my watch list for the month of November. It was a good, like, as you can tell, like, my bottom of the list was still a pretty good movie. So I had a really great month. What did you watch in the month of November? Please let me know down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this, give a like and a subscribe for more videos like this. Thank you so much for watching. With all that said, don't forget to enjoy yourself today. Have a great time. I'll see you next time.